Brilliant. Can you hear me well? Good. I'd like to start then by introducing myself. My name is Ian Ferguson, and I'm here representing the O-Power platform, the demand-side management wing of Oracle Energy and Water's suite of utility-focused solutions. Like the other speakers on the stage here now and earlier today, I want to spend a few minutes talking about how technology can play a role in demand-side management, particularly in parallel with policy. Our approach at O-Power is a little bit different, though, than the approach many of the speakers on the stage here have taken. I don't think that's a problem. Different is good, and I think in this case, complementary. It's an exciting solution, I think, that we have, and I'm certainly looking forward to sharing it with you today. Generally, when we talk about technology, we talk about things. We talk about heat pumps or batteries, for example. Maybe no surprise to those of you familiar with Oracle, I'd like to actually talk about software. And specifically, the type of software I'd like to talk about is software applied to a resource we have in abundance, utility data, especially data at retail utilities, like the utilities in many of the countries from which we are visiting here today. We can take new technology and apply it to existing data to drive meaningful and measurable change in the way energy users use energy around the world and across a number of different applications. All it takes is the political willpower to move forward with that type of an endeavor. There's actually a repeatable formula to driving change in human behavior, and I want to talk about that formula today. Before I do, though, I think it's useful to talk a little bit about how utilities generally approach demand-side management programs. What you see on the screen in front of you today is a representative example of energy users. It's a complicated group with a number of different characteristics and end uses that make it hard to consolidate and simplify to bring benefit to the grid. I feel confident saying that it's complicated because generally worldwide, we don't do that well. Most demand-side management programs run by utilities today reach only the most engaged energy users. And that's a shame. Less engaged energy users can and should benefit from the technology improvements that we all are making, both with respect to affordability and because if we can engage those less engaged users, they can actually be a powerful resource to benefit the grid. Technology, and particularly the software I'm going to talk about today, makes it possible to do two things with those less engaged users. It makes it possible to increase adoption of current utility demand-side management programs. Often utilities are running these programs already, heat pump promotions, smart thermostat promotions, but customers, energy users don't know much about them. Thoughtfully applying technology can change that. Thoughtfully applying technology to the data that we already have access to can also change energy usage habits permanently and over time in a measurable way. I'm going to talk again a little bit more about how that happens in the next couple of minutes. The key, generally, is personalization. And that's where the technology I'd like to speak about comes in. We have a wealth of tools already built by third-party providers like Oracle, but also by utilities themselves. Just a few examples of that type of technology are on the screen in front of you here. But I think they're a good representative example of the type of technology that makes it easier for us to reach out to energy users and speak to them about their individual energy usage, not just in generalizations. That's important because when we can apply these tools to that mess of data, we can do some remarkable things. We can move from a clump of difficult to understand data to actually go and recognize how users are using energy. We can find out, for example, that maybe one residential homeowner is in a single family home with an electric vehicle. That person has a very different profile and should be communicated with differently than a limited income renter who's not particularly digitally engaged. Once we can identify customers where they are, we can have a conversation with them in a way that is actually meaningful. Because what we've found at O-Power is that generally people are interested in macro trends, but always they're interested in the energy usage of their own home, and particularly the way that energy usage impacts their bill. Once you can personalize experiences for these customers, you can build out different means of communication across channels and in ways that can be impactful. In both ways that I mentioned earlier, both in increasing adoption in other demand-side management programs and in permanently changing energy usage. I mentioned a few minutes ago that there's a formula to driving this type of change. I want to talk about that formula now. It's a formula with 4 parts. The first is large quantities of data. And we're fortunate worldwide to have those large quantities of data. Utilities, and particularly retail utilities, have access to enough data to personalize experiences for energy users, to reach out and communicate with them in a way that changes behavior. The second part of the formula is an analytics platform. You need an analytics platform, one that's complex and can process all of that data to build the tools I showed on the slide here. They're complicated tools to build, but worthwhile and I think necessary if what matters to us is actually changing the way end users use energy. An analytics platform, though, by itself isn't enough. We learned the hard way through trial and error that you can't just show end users how it is they're using energy. You need to show them how they're using energy when it matters to them and in a manner that actually might change their behavior. We found that energy users generally think about energy usage for, on average, only 7 minutes a year. It's a very small window to hit. In order to hit it, you need to apply behavioral science. You need to think about the things that make us all tick as people and figure out a way to not just communicate with customers with interesting analytics, but communicate with them using that behavioral science to change the way that they think about energy usage and their relationship with their utility. The fourth piece of the formula is the one most often forgotten: measurable program design. Many utilities are building out tools that at least nominally do this work, but often they don't build out a program design in which they can measure if the technology they built is actually working. There are a number of ways to build program designs in a way that is measurable and in a way that is reputably measurable. I'll talk about some of them over the next couple of minutes, but I think the most important point I want to make here is that if you don't build a measurable program design, you won't know if your technology is working. And if you don't know if your technology is working, you don't know when it breaks or how to fix it or how to improve it. I also mentioned about 5 minutes ago that I'm here on behalf of the O-Power platform specifically. At O-Power, we've been working on not just figuring out what this formula looks like, but trying to optimize it for over a decade now. And I want to talk a little bit about our experience in this space. We've had the privilege since 2007 of serving over 175 utilities in 12 different countries, including notably our host country of France and the country of our hosts, Japan. In that time, we've had the privilege to work with some remarkable people, and we've had the privilege to work on some quite exciting and successful projects. I have some results from those projects here on the screen in front of you. Except in exceptional circumstances, at O-Power, we measure our results in one of 2 ways, either through direct surveys with energy end users, or through randomized control trial, the same rigorous methodological process by which drugs are determined successful or unsuccessful at preventing disease. There are a couple of takeaways, I think, on a slide in front of you that I want you to walk away with from this presentation. The first is maybe confirmation of a claim that I made at the very start of the presentation. This type of technology, this type of personalization can do 2 things in a real, measurable, and permanent way. It can change energy habits for every energy user. And you can see that not just in the reduction of over 36 terawatt hours of energy saved with this type of program, but also in the peak demand capacity resource we're showing on the screen in front of you. This type of technology can shift customers off of usage at the most expensive days of the year and the most expensive times of the day. It's quite exciting, I think, as long as it's enabled well. Additionally, this type of technology can increase adoption of current programs. We see up to 5 times faster product and program adoption with this type of personalized communication. And really, that's no surprise, because when you can communicate with people in the way that they're thinking about their energy usage, it's much easier to educate them about complex topics like heat pumps. Not everybody has the privilege to come to a conference like this and hear a day of talking about technology. There's one other takeaway I think that's worthwhile from our experience at O-Power, and that's that this application works across borders and across cultures. Perhaps the best example of that is our work in Japan. A few years ago, we ran a project with the Japanese Ministry of the Environment and 5 separate retailers focused on energy efficiency. The ultimate goal of that program was preventing the emission of CO2. And to be honest with you all, when we first took on the project, we were nervous about how to forecast this program. We weren't sure whether this type of technology, this type of personalized messaging would be applicable in the Japanese market, where in this particular case, focused on residential homes, the approach to energy is very different from our native United States. We were pleased to see, though, that the results were just as robust in Japan as they were in the United States or France, Italy, Malaysia, and India. It turns out that this type of behavioral trigger, this type of technology, is applicable to all of us. And it's the type of technology that should enable and empower that shared humanity to move us to a cleaner and greener energy future. It wasn't just technology that led to our success in Japan. It was also a series of wise policy decisions. And before I end my presentation today, I'd like to share a couple of the policy decisions made for this program that we would love to see and love to encourage this type of technology growth and adoption worldwide. There are three primary ways that governments and policy can support this type of technology: align stakeholder goals, encourage measurements and rewards, and support scalability. I'll talk about each in turn. The first is align stakeholder goals. And admittedly, this is one way that policy can help that's not relevant everywhere in the world, but it's relevant where there's a distinction between retail utilities and transmission and distribution utilities. It's because in order for this technology to work, you must have large quantities of data. And the entities that have those large quantities of data, household level relationship, and can communicate at a household level are retail utilities. But retail utilities don't stand to benefit from energy efficiency and peak management programs. The pain that those programs improve is mostly felt by transmission and distribution utilities. Where there's a separation of that pain and that opportunity, governments can and should bridge the gap. The second way that policy can support this type of personalized technology is by encouraging measurements and rewards. Scalable demand-side programs at utilities often lack reputable measurement mechanisms, reliable measurement mechanisms that can be repeated. A randomized control trial is certainly one way to run this type of a program. It's not the only way. But just as important as measurement is rewarding utilities, especially retail suppliers who run this type of program. Italy is a great example of a country who has put together a very effective cost recovery program for utilities that run this type of demand-side management. The final way that policymakers can support this type of technology is by supporting scalability. And they can do that in two separate ways. The first is one we've talked about a lot today. It's digitalization. Digital programs increase reach and consequently impact. And so anywhere that we can encourage digital engagement with consumers on the phones that we all carry with us all the time, the better off we'll be. The second way to support this type of technology is with an opt-out program design, or in places where that's not always possible, like here in the EU, a clever opt-in design. It's being done already, utilities around the world, and it's the best way to reach not just the most engaged energy consumers, but all of the energy consumers in a utility service territory, particularly the ones who maybe can benefit most from this type of technology. That's all I have for you today. I appreciate you all taking the time to listen, and I'm looking forward to more conversation later this afternoon.